Hey everyone, welcome to another entry in the Hyrule Compendium. So, in our series, we've been, touching upon topics in Zelda, talking about them, and it's been all Breath of the Wild talk, because of course it's on everyone's mind.
Kind of a big deal.
But here's a milestone: is that in that we're not going to talk about, well, we'll probably talk about Breath of the Wild at some point somehow, but today we're actually referring to alias fake names comment. That's a great name. They're basically asking if they remake Skyward Sword, would they remake it with traditional controls, or would they use the motion controls that they used in that game?
So I think Nintendo has kind of they've allowed themselves to potentially remake Skyward Sword because of the Joy-Con. I don't know if the technology works perfectly with that, but it sounds like it could be a replica for the nunchuck and Wiimote. That being said, I feel that if Skyward Sword was remade, it would need to get what I refer to as like the Wind Waker HD treatment, as opposed to the Twilight Princess HD treatment, where they need to more fundamentally change the game to accommodate the changes. So like Twilight Princess, it was just a paint over, basically. They upgraded the resolution, but Wind Waker, they remade a bunch of things. They totally redid the
Triforce Quest and stuff like that.
They added the Swift Sail. They moved a few things around, little things.
Yeah, they streamlined a couple things in the game.
Because I think a good portion of Skyward Sword, some of the enemies you encountered were almost directly connected with the control scheme. So, like for example, one of my favorite enemies in the game was the Stallmaster. I'm not sure if you remember him. He was one of the mini bosses in the Skyview Temple, and he had the two swords, and he'd like hold his swords this way, meaning you had to attack him vertically. And then I think later on, I think it was in the Ancient Cistern, I think you fought a variant that had three swords. We had multiple hands. I think that was the Stallmaster. The other one was a Stall, whatever it was. But this one, it was like, so he was protecting three areas of his body. So you either had to directly hit him in the one spot that was open, and then later in his second phase, he had four arms. So you couldn't slash him anyway. Instead, you had to like do a direct stab. This was one of the enemies that worked great with the control scheme, and I don't know if if that experience can be replicated with a more traditional control scheme.
Yeah, I feel similarly about most of the. Are there any enemies where you feel like the control scheme hinders the gameplay?
Some of them maybe. I think the biggest complaint is like the Technoblins or the Bokoblins. It's like they're blocking here, so you gotta like sometimes, like I remember, I didn't have much problem with the controls, and I think they're okay.
Yeah.
They're fine. Just too much repetition, I think, sometimes. No, actually, I don't think any of the enemies were hindered by the controls. But I felt there wasn't as much of a variety of enemies. It suffered from a lot of the same symptoms of what Breath of the Wild suffered from with the enemy selection.
Yes.
Where they had one variant of a Bokoblin. Oh, but then there was a blue Bokoblin. Oh, then there was a Bokoblin Archer. Then there was a Technoblin. Then there was a Cursed Bokoblin. It was, I mean, I feel Skyward Sword had a little bit more variety, but I did like what my favorite enemy in Skyward Sword, or one of them at least, is the Deku Baba. Now, that might seem like it's a regular enemy, like that's been a staple since Ocarina of Time, but this one, since there was like 3 or 4 different ways to kill a Deku Baba in this one, like the easiest way, so depending on which way, it's like its head was like a shell in this one, so you couldn't just stab randomly. If it opened its mouth sideways, you had to do a vertical slash, if it was, or you had to do a horizontal slash, or you could throw a bomb and it would eat it and explode. Or you can use the beetle to cut off its vine. I liked that there was so much. I think you could shoot it with an arrow too. So there's like 5 different, 4. It was like that's something that's common in Breath of the Wild too.
Yeah.
but that was one of my favorite enemies, and so it used motion control to kill it, but otherwise it could use a traditional one as well because of that particular enemy. But
Yeah, I think with the controls, it all comes down to like personal preference, and it's a thing we talked about with Breath of the Wild. Like, there are some people who are just never gonna make the jump to like playing a game like Breath of the Wild. And I think there are some people who are, they're just never going to be comfortable with the motion controls like other people are. But so I think a lot of people want the game to be made more accessible to that. But I don't think you can do that without totally just ruining anything like that's unique about the game, I guess.
yeah,
Otherwise it becomes like the combat in that becomes worse than like Wind Waker,
it would be incredibly simple, and because there's not as much variety, because the whole point was they made the game around that mechanic, I feel.
Yeah, exactly.
And the enemies, all of them, especially some of the bosses, they could revamp them, sort of like how they revamped some of the Majora's Mask 3D bosses, like just change them.
Mm-hmm.
That's always, and I think they would have to do that if they were to remake it.
Yeah.
So I think a remake for that game could work. I think it's inevitable at this point, but this one might take a little bit more work than, say, Twilight Princess did. Maybe more the Wind Waker treatment. And I'm not convinced that they would make that significant change, but it's plausible. But then if they dropped the control scheme or tweaked it a little bit, I think they would need to revamp a lot of the enemies and bosses quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it would just be, that seems like such an undertaking for like to redesign most of the game like that. That seems way more than what they did with Wind Waker.
Right. I'm not sure if the cost benefit is there.
Yeah.
Like, because that's probably, you need a team, you need it's almost like remaking a game. Like putting resources as if it's a new game to an not to that extent, but
a little more so than Wind Waker HD.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So I agree kind of with what you said earlier, in that it would be more of I would prefer more of a Wind Waker HD type remake, because I think a bigger complaint than the controls in that game is kind of that last portion of the game where a lot of those things that you do towards the end of the game could be optional or something like that.
Right, yeah. Changing the flow of the game is probably was a bigger criticism I have of Skyward Sword than the controls are fine. I think that was not the problem. I don't think there was any glaring problems with that game though. They had its fault. It's sort of like Breath of the Wild, sort of like Wind Waker. I think where every Zelda game has its faults.
Right.
But yeah, we're in agreement, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess this is one where I would expect people's opinions vary greatly on this. So let us know where you stand on this, like whether you would want the controls changed if they remade it, or if you would want the game, like the flow of the game, or both, or neither.
Or whether if you don't even want it remade or not.
Yeah. There's a lot of people who would just give me a new game.
Yeah.
Or if you don't want it remade, is it because you are just fine with the original game, or do you just never want to play Skyward Sword again?
Yeah.
Because there's that group too.
There's also the argument of any resource that's made towards a remake is a resource that could have gone towards a new game.
Yeah.
So, and I understand sometimes there's multiple teams, or they put it out to a third party or whatever, but make that third party make a new game. You know what I mean?
There's always like, well, you're still spending money on it. And you could just allocate that money into. Yeah. Well, cool. So let us know where you stand on that. Let us know what else you'd like us to talk about. Could be anything.
Yeah, we've opened up the floodgates.
Yeah, it's time
Pandora's
to talk.
box.
We can talk about Tail Cave. They're gonna do one video just on that. But thanks so much for watching.
We're gonna get comments on Tail Cave now.
Let us know.